Don Beyer is one heck of a guy, Congressman Don Beyer. I've known him, gosh, for most of my career. I know I don't look like I'm much past 28, but I am. I go back a few years with Don. In fact, when he first got into the automobile business, going to work, with his dad and his brother Mike, in the Volvo store back in the early 90s. In Congress, Don chairs the House Joint Economic Committee, chairs that, and he serves on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. So he's somebody to go to for your tax refund. Prior to this, he was Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. He did that for 9 years back in the 1990s. And one of the most fun assignments that Don had was when he was U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Between 2009 and 2013, I was on an auto show trip because that's what I used to do in my prior life. We ran the Washington Auto Show. We were over at the, where would it have been? It was either the Paris or the Frankfurt, Germany Auto Show. And we popped into Switzerland, close by, to call on the ambassador. And it was wonderful. I mean, he treated us like, we were diplomats or something. And we had a wonderful time, and notwithstanding the fact that some of us had entirely too much to drink. The store that Don and his brother Mike went to work for with their dad, family business, was a Volvo store. And then the two of them in the mid 1980s expanded it to include Volvo, Land Rover, Volkswagen, Kia, Mazda, and Subaru. He's past president of the National Volvo Retail Advisory Board, the American International Auto Dealers Association, which is a big deal in the auto industry, First Union National Bank, so you can get you a loan if you need one. He's part of the new Democrat Climate Task Force and the Virginia Economic Recovery Commission. He's had board posts at Fairfax Chamber of Commerce, American Cancer Society, and First Union Bank. Awards, he's been a presidential scholar from Lyndon Baines Johnson. If anybody's old enough to remember that. The Grand Award for Highway Safety was his, and Time Magazine Deal of the Year for Metropolitan Washington, D.C. I had something to do with that back in 1991. He's a local boy, went to Gonzaga High School here in D.C., which is wonderful because I went to St. John's, and we used to play football against them. I won't get into how that went down, Don. I want to, pull off any sore scabs from old wounds. He went to Williams College, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa. And in addition to being a charming fellow, he's one of the smartest guys I know. He's got 4 children, 2 grandchildren, and he and his wife, Megan, reside in Alexandria. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, here's Don Beyer.
Gerry, thank you very much. I really am sorry I can't be there with you in person. When we scheduled it with the expectations that votes would be later in the afternoon. Instead, they're scheduled to start at 1 o'clock. So I don't think I'll have to leave early, but I'll have to go right from here to the floor. And with the advent of proxy voting, which came with COVID, for the first time in American history, people can vote through a proxy. For some reason, perhaps it's the fact that I live closest than anybody else, I'm approaching 5,000 proxy votes since COVID, which is a record that will probably last many centuries. So I have to be here for all the people that don't come. But I'm delighted to be here, especially with Gerry, who I was class of 68 at Gonzaga. I believe he was 68 at St. John's. We lost freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, but we beat St. John's senior year, which is the only year that really matters. And we've been pals for a long time. We were both so-called natural born leaders, which is to say sons of the founder. So while Gerry succeeded his father, I succeeded mine. And he's been a friend for a long, long, wonderful time. My dear brother-in-law, Drew Carroll, has been the rock of the Alexandria Rotary for the last 30 years. When I was in Switzerland, I did a lot of Rotary events. Mostly because in Switzerland, the Rotary is like you go from the Army, which is universal conscription, to Rotary, to leadership in industry and government. And you can't skip any of those steps. It's like the Trilateral Commission, the Rotary in Switzerland. Very big deal. And I was never brave enough to join because of the weekly requirement that you showed up at lunch every Tuesday or breakfast every Wednesday morning. With all these statewide runs and the like, I've been very scattered, but always with a great deal of appreciation and respect for Rotarians and all that you contribute to the community. They said I could talk about whatever I wanted to talk about. So I go into where my heart is, which is my perception. And when I ran for this office 8 years ago, one of my promises was that I was going to come and try in my humble way, one of 535 people, to heal a broken institution where everybody hated each other and wouldn't ride the elevator together and all that. When I got here, I discovered it's exactly the opposite. It's one of the friendliest places I've ever been. I have many, many Republican friends. Most everybody's nice to each other and respectful to each other. We root for each other. It's like a really big, crazy high school, but it's fun. However, it's still broken, and it's broken in fundamentally structural ways. Not broken because of the people, but broken because of the way it has evolved over the years. On the one hand, there's the Senate, and I'm not going to talk about that because it's frustrating, too frustrating for me to talk about. But the filibuster itself, which largely through history has been used to hold back civil rights reform, right now holds back almost everything else. We have been involved in building many constitutions for countries around the world. Not once have we included a filibuster, not once, nor an electoral college. Filibuster is not in the Constitution. The filibuster is not in the rules of the Senate. The filibuster is just a back of the seat tradition that goes back to basically slavery and trying to keep the slavery in place for the southern states and the expansions. The other challenge of the Senate is the one-person hold. Any one person, usually Rand Paul, can stop any bill from going through the Senate. And if it's important enough, big enough, like passing a budget or passing the defense authorization, you can go through the multi-day process to overcome that one person's hold. But that also means that there are hundreds of bills that 530 people would support, but one person keeps from passing. There's a lot that I would do to fix the Senate. The other part is they're all really old. And as a 72-year-old, I don't object to that, but they're not as nearly as energetic as the House. But I came to talk about the House and in its construction. Because once again, in the House, boy, is it difficult to get things done. I was lieutenant governor for 8 years, as Jerry mentioned. I loved the Virginia Senate. We would do, in 60 days a year, we would do 1,000 bills, and every bill would have a hearing. Every bill would have a vote. A lot of times the vote was to kill the bill, but at least it got a hearing. In the House, on the other hand, very few bills ever get a hearing. Very few bills ever get a vote. And then the ones that do go over to the Senate to die. We will pass about 400 little bills. They're put on the so-called suspension calendar. And they usually get north of 400 votes out of 435. Almost all are bipartisan. You look for, but they're all relatively small. They're not unimportant. They're never going to make the Washington Post, the New York Times, or the Wall Street Journal. But the big stuff, let me just talk about the big stuff that we don't get done. We haven't passed an immigration bill in forever. Yet, despite the fact that we know that we have a desperate need for highly qualified nurses and doctors and engineers and dental technicians and lots of other people. We passed the first gun bill in 30 years, and it was tiny. I mean, it was good that we did it in a bipartisan way, but it took 30 years to do it. Social Security is supposed to run out of money in 2034. Or we don't fund it up. So benefits will be cut to 80% and then 75%, 70%. We've known about this forever, but we can't deal with it. Healthcare, we still have, it was 22 million Americans didn't have health insurance for a single day last year. I could go on and on. of all the things that any of you as leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, education leaders would address, and we seem incapable of doing. Which leads to a really interesting thing that my kids showed me a study last year that showed that of all the respected professions, third from the bottom was businessman. Second from the bottom was car dealer. But absolute bottom was member of Congress. So I got the three least respected professions all wrapped up. And the approval rating for Congress, the last one poll I saw showed 7% of Americans approve of Congress. It's right at the very bottom, below everything else. And yet, we just had an election, and Democrats, we lost 4 incumbents. And they were all in districts. They all lost because of redistricting, where they were put in districts that had a lot more Republicans than Democrats. I don't know how many Republicans incumbents lost, 2, maybe 3, which means people hate Congress, but they love their individual representatives. All around Virginia, Ben Klein, a Republican, Morgan Griffith, a Republican, me, Jerry Connolly, Bobby Scott, Don, all of us got north of 60%. Some of us got north of 70%, despite the fact that people don't trust Congress. So what's going on here? Why do we like our members of Congress, but we hate the institution itself? And I mean, the biggest reason is because we don't get enough done. This has been a very good year, the best year since Lyndon Johnson, 1965, with the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Act, the Postal Service reform. But this is a very unusual or special year. I don't expect next year to be anything like it. So what's wrong? Number one is that in the primaries, the extreme person always wins. That the primaries are where most elections are decided. And so if you're a Democrat, it's the base, the core base, the really enthusiastic people who show up. So you are more likely to have an AOC beat a moderate Democrat like Joe Crowley, or a Marjorie Taylor Greene beat a moderate Republican like whoever the guy she beats. So that you end up, when they finally get to Congress, you've elected the more left and the more right, and very few people in the center. The second big thing is and that's driven by the fact that there's gerrymandering so many different places. And what gerrymandering does is it makes the seats safe. And when they're safe, it's all about the primary. Virginia, God bless us, a year ago passed a constitutional amendment to ungerrymander the Virginia seats. So there was a special commission, special masters who drew the seats, and they drew it without deciding, how to protect House members. House members didn't particularly like this, but it was still the right thing to do. As a consequence, we had 3 very competitive seats: the 2nd, the 7th, and the 10th. Whereas a lot of states don't have a single competitive seat. Like Maryland maybe has 1, Massachusetts has none, Vermont has none, on and on. And then the third big piece is we have plurality voting. So first past the post. So in a primary or in a general election, if there are more than 2 people, you can win with 48% or 47%, or many cases 22%. There have been primaries in the last 4 years where somebody won with just a shade over 20% because there were 5 or 6 or 7 candidates. And that means that 78% of the people didn't want that person. My 2 most favorite examples are Paul LePage, who's sort of the Donald Trump of governors. He served 8 years in Maine as the governor, despite getting 37% twice. The 63% of the people in Maine didn't like him and didn't want him, but he was still the governor for 8 years. We had a mayor's election in Alexandria not too long ago. The vice mayor against the current mayor against an earlier mayor. And the 2 pro-growth, pro-business guys got 30% and 33%, and the vice mayor got 37%. I guarantee you that 63% did not want her to be the mayor, but she got to serve for the next 4 years, the next 3 years, because of plurality voting. All of which leads to a French political scientist named Duverger in the 1990s, who postulated Duverger's law, which is that single member districts with plurality voting, first past the post, not a majority, inevitably lead to highly polarized two-party systems, which is exactly what we have. Multi-member districts, plurality voting, and highly polarized. So what's the answer? For 8 years now, I've been working on the Fair Representation Act. It's a tough act. I think we're up to 22 co-sponsors, but let me describe its three things. The first thing it does is it creates multi-member districts. So in Northern Virginia right now, I have a single member district. Jerry Connolly has a single member district. Jennifer Wexton has a single member. Then we combine them into one large 3-member district. And then Republicans will put up 3 candidates. Democrats will put up 3 candidates. Maybe the Green Party, maybe the Libertarians. Who knows? All kinds of different people could put up their candidates. And you would rank your choices 1, 2, and 3. One of the things that it does right away is it does away with gerrymandering. It's very difficult to gerrymander a multi-member district, which is a really good thing. If you did away with gerrymandering, it would change the whole character of the country. Not necessarily make it more Democratic or more Republican, we should make it more fair and also make it more centrist. The second thing we would introduce would be ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, one mathematician won the Nobel Prize in Mathematics back in 1950 for the idea of ranked choice voting, which is that if your first choice doesn't win, your second choice moves up and becomes your first choice. And if your second choice doesn't win, your third choice comes up and becomes your first choice. So when you have a multi-member district with 3 members in it or 5 members in it, almost everyone's going to have somebody that they voted for win. Where right now in Alexandria, if you're a Democrat or a Republican rather, nobody you vote for is going to win. So it makes things much more proportional. For example, in Massachusetts right now, there are 9 House seats. It's 9 Democrats and 0 Republicans, despite the fact they have a Republican governor that everybody loves. In Connecticut, it's 6-0 Democrats. But in Ohio, it's 13-2. Ohio is basically a 52-48 Republican state. And yet the numbers, because of gerrymandering and ranked choice and absence of ranked choice voting, are 13-2. Oklahoma's 5-0, despite the fact that I think it just elected a Democratic governor. So what you see with ranked choice voting is much more of a proportional type system where everybody gets a chance to have their person actually win. And finally, the most controversial part of this is expanding the size of the House. I represent about 800,000 citizens. The next highest number of citizens that any parliamentary member throughout the world represents is 200,000. Now, I'm not complaining. I love all of our people. But essentially, the U.S. House started really small back in 1789 and grew as the population grew. And it grew and it grew and it grew to present 435. And in the early 19-teens, when some of us were still alive or have already been born, they decided there were too many damn people coming from Italy and Ireland. And they wanted to stop the takeover of politics by the Irish and the Italians. So they capped the member of Congress at 435. But there's no reason for it to be capped. And if you had expanded it, if you kept expanding it on the same ratio that we did for the first 140 years of American history, we'd have another 150 members of Congress than we have right now. That, by the way, makes the multi-member districts so much easier. It also brings the members of Congress much closer to the people, which is what you want, that where they know most of the constituents alike. Impact overall, if you could do these 3 things, do multi-member districts, expand the size of the House, and do ranked choice voting, what difference would it make? Well, number one, everybody right now in my safe Democratic seat, 73% this last race, I had a primary opponent, and that was the race. So who am I appealing to? I'm appealing to the more rabid, deeply ideological people that show up in Democratic primaries, and the same in the Republican primaries. My Republican pals on the Capitol Hill are never worried about the Democratic opponent in general. They're looking over their shoulder to the right to see who's going to be more extreme than they are and is going to knock them off. There are many, many, many examples, not just Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. Lauren, by the way, beat a really good friend, a moderate Republican named Scott Tipton, very conservative, great representative for Colorado's Western Slope. but he couldn't compete with her wackiness, and she won. And we have the same thing on our side with the Ilhan Omars and the AOCs and the Cori Bushes and the like. So you get rid, you don't totally get rid of the extremes, but you bring people back to the center. I then want to make sure that I am showing up on the ballots of all those moderates and independents and Republicans. Second thing is much less negative campaign. If you watch TV anytime in the last 2 months, all you saw was negative ad after negative ad. But you can't do that when it's ranked choice voting, because whoever goes negative falls to the bottom right away. So the negative campaigning largely disappears, which then means you need a lot less money, because right now, something like 80% of the money is spent on negative advertising. You raise money to tear down your opponent, and usually to exaggerate the record so that it looks really good. And then when does it happen? You need the next census. So this wouldn't kick in until 2032. So it's a long-term play, but that's actually good, because right now, the people in Massachusetts, the 9 Democrats, don't really like this system, because it means that 2 or 3 of them are going to be replaced by Republicans. And the Republicans in Ohio don't really like it, because it means that 3 or 4 of them will be replaced by Democrats. So it appeals to people that haven't been elected yet, rather than the people that hold the seats already. However, if you step back and say, how do we make the US House, and therefore the Congress, a much more representative, responsive, accomplished, productive legislative body, multi-member districts, ranked choice voting, and in a perfect world, expanding the size of the House, would all move us in the direction of having a democracy that wasn't quite as slow or frustrating as the one that we have. Anyway, that's a quick overview. I'm sorry to be so political science nerdy about it, but these are, when you look and see that our voting is so tribal right now, that the penalty for disappointing or disobeying your caucus and voting with the other side is that highly motivated ideological base is going to punish you in the next primary, means that there aren't a lot of crossover votes. When I ran in 1993 for lieutenant governor, 27% of the people voted for George Allen and for me. That would never happen today in the US Congress, because that notion of crossover voting has just gone away because of the polarization. And this, I think, is the biggest single step we could make to overcome that polarization, to bring us back to a much more bipartisan America. And if you believe, as I do, that neither party has a monopoly on wisdom or truth, and that even our best bills are imperfect and that we have to improve them, this would be a way forward. So thank you for letting me rant, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about this or anything else that you may have. And you may have heard the buzzer in the background. That was the opening bell on the first round of votes, which go for about 30 minutes. So I got plenty of time.
Yes, Don, good to see you again. We worked together at the Virginia General Assembly over a number of years, and it's great to be reconnected. Looking at a very simple question, but a very hard answer, I'm sure. Now that the midterms are over, you have, in essence, supposedly parity between the House and the Senate. What do we need to be doing as citizens and also as Rotarians to allow more open dialogue, but also to try to repair the relations between the 2 major parties and see what we can do to start moving the affairs of state forward in the United States, and not just trying to kill everything, but see how we can actually benefit the citizens. And thank you for being here and your many years of service, both in Virginia and also now in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sam. I enjoyed working with you in the General Assembly. The state governments are the laboratories of democracy.
Correct.
You can get so much more done, and it was very, very fun and very fulfilling. At the federal level, when we actually get something done, it affects a lot more people. It's just harder. Yeah, I think you asked what for me is the most fundamental question. As I worry about America's future, the biggest worry that I have is the division that we have. Different senses, different stories, different histories, different priorities, and I don't have any magic bullet for how to overcome that. I know personally it's a matter of not demonizing my friends on the other side, but trying to create as many friendships, relationships, mutual respect, working to do bills together wherever we possibly can. Virginia is the only delegation where we get together every month. Every Democrat, every Republican, Mark, Warner, Tim Kaine come over from the Senate to have lunch and talk about what we should be doing together. For example, trying to get FBI to Springfield is right now a high priority. Cutting the ribbon on the Silver Line yesterday out to Dulles. Looking for things like that. But structurally, the big thing is just encouraging all of us, your elected officials and those that are part of that, to remember that the other party is not the enemy, that there's much good that we can do together, and that almost all of us are here because we want to make a difference in a positive way for the people that we serve. By the way, one of the big challenges right now is the turmoil within the Republican Party, and I'm not part of that, but the split between the MAGA Republicans, like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, and the old style Republicans. You think locally, people like Rob Whitman or Ben Klein, is really pretty huge. And we totally expect the Republicans to control the House. They're 217 right now. They need one more out of 12 seats that are toss up. But it's going to be really difficult for Kevin McCarthy to lead a group when 7 or 8 of them are going to be against anything that he wants to do. But I don't know that's something that the Republican Party is going to have to sort out in the years ahead. I know Lynn Holt, our governor back in 1970, 1974, spent years trying to figure out how to heal that. And Liz Cheney will be at the front of that group right now, trying to figure out how to do it.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for being here. Back when there was a Vienna Times years ago, I used to keep a close eye on you since I was writing the paper. Careful what you say about AOC. She's my heartthrob. I think she's a visionary. It's nice that she's coming not from money, and I'm down with AOC. Sorry, but the question is, how are you ever going to get anything done if you're spending 80% of your time raising money rather than legislating? And the two biggest obstacles, I think, to two words to fixing Congress are citizens united. I think the Supreme Court has recently done as many disservices, but that is one of the greatest ones, in my opinion. So how do you overcome the money problem, the fact that you got to spend more time raising money than you do legislating?
Bill, thank you for following all us in the Vienna papers. I lived on East Street in Vienna for 5 wonderful years before my wife made me keep my prenuptial promise and move back to Alexandria. I mentioned what I think the number one problem is the division. Close behind it is the role of money in politics. And I don't say that in terms of people buying votes. I don't ever remember, well, twice in my whole 40 years as somebody that's given me money come and ask for something that I thought was like they bought the vote. And of course I had to say no right away, just simple integrity. But the amount of money that's being spent, especially not even candidate versus candidate money, but so-called dark money, outside money, is ridiculous. I love our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, but in a heartbeat, I would support an amendment to the First Amendment, which limited the role of money in politics, including personal money. You've seen more and more billionaires either running themselves and putting in, hundreds of millions of dollars. The guy just ran for mayor of Los Angeles, or like the guy who gave 1.3 billion, that's with a B, to the one of the societies just to affect elections. So the role of the whole idea of a democracy is that we're all equal and that one vote, one person, one vote. But the money makes it very, very unequal. And by the way, this is not a partisan thing. You've got plenty on the Republican side, and you have George Soros, and up until a couple of days ago, Sam Banks-Friedman on the Democratic side. You got the big money people basically corrupting the process both ways. When I was in Switzerland, It was, in the 2009 to 2013. So I spent a lot of time with the former Soviet states, the Bulgarias and Romanias and Czech Republics and the like. And we'd be working with them on overcoming the corruption in their governments left over from the Soviet system. And they would point and say, "You're talking to us?" After the way we see politics works in the United States with all that money. And at a certain level, it has to affect. When a given industry ends up giving you hundreds of thousands of dollars, even if it's $5,000 at a clip, it's going to change how you think about those processes. It'd be really important to get the money out. Switzerland had a wonderful idea. They banned all radio and television political advertising, which again, I would vote for in a heartbeat. So. And by the way, fixing Citizens United, again, it's going to take a constitutional amendment. But again, I may be naive. I think if we sent a constitutional amendment to the 50 states and said, we're going to get most of the money out of politics, most of the states would jump on it. I certainly say, as an elected official who spends, I don't spend 80% of the time, but 8 to 10 hours a week calling my best friends and saying, Dr. Hancock, would you like to send another $500? It's not the most fun or the best use of time.
David, go.
Hi, Congressman. This is David Krukoff. Nice to see you.
Thank you, David.
Don was a tenant of my father at on Eisenhower Avenue with the repair of his rovers. And I also worked with Don on some real estate matters way back when. But Don is brave and he's a political reformer. And I'm a political reformer. And I want to talk to you about political reform with someone in your Virginia caucus. As you may know, that since you're in Alexandria, and you live very close to the land that retroceded, the only way that we ever gained our complete voting rights in the District of Columbia, which we are in right now, is through the process of retrocession. In your Virginia caucus, Morgan Griffin is actually a retrocessionist. And I was wondering if you would be interested in talking to him about the Fair Representation Act and potentially combining some of those ideas that you have, multi-member districts, which have been outlawed for about 55 years or something like that, and ranked choice voting, and also incorporating ways that you can help us in the District of Columbia gain our complete voting rights without moving. I think that what happened in 1846 to 1847 was obviously very productive, but our disenfranchisement is abhorrent. And I would look forward to your cooperation. And what do you think about working with Morgan Griffin in Virginia?
David, I will seek out Morgan this afternoon. I think it's a good idea. He's been a friend for a long, long time, despite being the other party. We've often vote differently, but I'd love to talk to him. And I do agree. People in the rest of the world don't understand how we can have someone can live in the District of Columbia and not be able to have representation at the federal level. I mean, Eleanor Holmes Norton's been there for a long, long time, but she didn't get to vote. She barely gets to participate.
Okay, last question, Kenny Barnes.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thank you so much for honoring us. My name is Kenny Barnes, and I just have a couple of questions that I am totally confused about. Number one, when you say that it's like high school in Congress, just good guys, and like high school pride or something. You have people in Congress trying to overthrow the government of the United States. I don't see how that can be like high school. And you say that these are good, decent people. I'm confused about that. So if you could clarify that for me. And there are people in Congress that are running on denying the fact of the president of the United States, that another person is still president, but they're good old boys. I have a problem understanding that. And the second thing I have a problem understanding is like, I think Bill just mentioned, when you compare the Marjorie Taylor Greene to an AOC, I mean, that's like comparing a total, I'm talking about the person, not the Congress itself, but a total white job to a person that is really trying to accomplish things for her constituents. That's for Social Security, that's for Medicaid, and you have this other person that's making up conspiracy theories, trying to do away with everyday benefits that affect people like me and average citizens. If you could clarify those 2 points for me, I would appreciate it.
Well, thank you for asking. I regret the impression of equivalence between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because they're in no way. Alex is a friend. I like her very much. She's smart as a whip, and she is an honest person who is doing her best. I would often, vary with her in legislative strategy. As she has said publicly, she's often more interested in moving the Overton window, changing people's overall perspective on a given issue, rather than getting legislation passed that can, show up on the president's desk. Marjorie Taylor Greene, on the other hand, is just a bomb thrower, period. There's no legislative interest whatsoever. The only equivalence is that they represent, in the simplest terms, the extremes of the respective parties. And the squad, which is AOC and Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib and stuff, they're not representative of the Democratic Party as a whole. They're out there, they're the ones who would talk about defunding the police or banning the eating of meat or whatever. And so it's fine in their respective districts, and we're a big tent, it's okay. But they also, if you're looking to make a Congress that is working better together, that has a much stronger center left, center right, you don't want to set up a system that is heavily biased towards people from the farther extremes. Now, I love my Democratic extreme because I'm a Democrat, and I'm sure there are people that love Marjorie Taylor Greene, but they're certainly very, very different people. On the election deniers, well, first of all, the insurrectionists. I was there for 17 hours. It was a terrible, frightening thing. One of the darkest days in American history. And there are probably a couple of knuckleheads who justify it, who was, people who say they were just tourists or whatever, or just patriotic displays. That's all craziness. The election deniers tend to fall into two categories. Those who actually believe it, which I think is relatively small, and those who do it in order to avoid Donald Trump's wrath. And that has been very disappointing to see the number of my Republican colleagues who I know can't believe the stuff that they have embraced. But they also have seen what happens in the Republican Party when you cross Donald Trump. Means that your political future is very much in jeopardy. 8 of the 10 people that voted to impeach Trump lost or chose not to run again. My friend Francis Rooney, who's a Republican from Florida, gone to Georgetown Prep back in the day. When he just said he was open to looking at the information about Trump's impeachment, got death threats, his house was attacked, his family felt threatened, decided not to run again. In no way, trying to work in a bipartisan way does not mean that I am in any way blessing or embracing the big lies that came out of 2020.
Congressman Don Beyer, as your constituent, I really appreciate and thank you for accepting my invitation to speak to our club. And I am pleased and proud to present you with this certificate, which signifies our commitment to plant a tree in your honor to improve and beautify the environment in our nation's capital. I will send your chief of staff the GPS coordinates so you could see where exactly we're planting your tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you.